I'd like to share, we first met in India in 2020, right before the pandemic. Jennifer and Aruna and I traveled to the Centennial of Rotary in India, and then we had the amazing opportunity to go to the Rotary Club of Calcutta Metropolitan, and Sylvia was the guest speaker there. And I knew Sylvia, so I was an exchange student in 1988, and at that time, I would go to Rotary meetings, and the Rotary meetings in Brazil were just like a bunch of older men sitting around with scotch in the middle of the table, and it was a different Rotary. And Sylvia really transformed that. But, the thing that was interesting, when I met Sylvia, I started crying. I broke down in tears. And it was because, when we talk about Sylvia and the work that she's done, it really opened the door for so many women. But I met, there's a Rotary dual member who's the first president of his Rotary Club in Blackburn, South Africa. He's a 30-year-old black man. And what Sylvia did opened the door for him. There's a transgender woman in Mumbai who's the president of her Rotary Club. And what Sylvia did opened the door for her. Today we heard from Renee talking about all the amazing work that the Rotary Club of Detroit is doing. Sylvia opened the door for her. And then you have your very own Jennifer Jones, and so many senior leaders in this room were female leaders. Sylvia opened the door for all of them, and for me personally, I remember when I first joined the Rotary Club of Hollywood in the mid-90s. It wasn't a space where it was a progressive club, but I wasn't comfortable bringing my husband Jason to Rotary events with me because I wasn't sure how he'd be responded, but I was accepted and I was welcomed, and that's because Sylvia opened the door for me. And so I broke down in tears because it was just such an amazing opportunity to get to know you. And then, we had the benefit of, it's strange, but during the pandemic, it actually turned into this opportunity for us to really get to know each other. Her son lives down the hill from me in California, and she would come up to see her grandchildren, and she'd cook this amazing Jamaican food all the time, and she would post it to social media. And so one day I'm like, when do I get a plate? She's like, come on down, so I did. And then it started a thing almost every month, 4 to 6 weeks usually, when she would come up to see her grandkids.
You know what they say about the weight of a man's stomach? It's hard.
And so we really were able to develop an amazing relationship. And if you had told me that one of my besties is going to be a 90-year-old black lady, I'd just say that tracks. But so I really wanted to start, I think that what you have done is open the door for so many, but when we talk about diversity in Rotary and when we look at things, we really need to look at our history. So I'm wondering if you can share with us, Sylvia, just about how this started. Share with us about how you became a Rotarian and how you became the first president of a Rotary Club.
It's interesting because I didn't know anything about Rotary. And this was in the 1960s. And I was a school principal in a little town in Pasadena, in a little town close to Pasadena in California. And I went, as most new principals do, I went to the district office to talk to the school superintendent to find out what this community was like, so that you know what you need to work on. And the superintendent, whose name was Richard Key, said at the time, you don't need to know anything about this district. You don't need to worry about this district because we have a Rotary Club here. So, what I knew about Rotary then could have been loosely written on the head of a pin. It was nothing. It was nothing. When I left New York and went to California, I was working for the United Nations in New York City. And I was telling someone today, I was telling, I think Jason or somebody today, that when we gave to charities, at that time, we gave to a place called United Way. And we didn't give to individual agencies that were working with particular charities like Rotary or Kiwanis or Lions or anything. But I knew about Kiwanis, and I knew, you guys know what Kiwanis means? Actually, it means waiting to get into Rotary. I also knew about Lions because I was a school principal, and Lions provide their eyeglasses for kids. And I knew about Elks and stuff like that because I lived in New York City, and you can't walk down 42nd Street, which is where the UN was, without walking into Elks with those big beautiful hats all the time. So, you know, you say, oh, those are Elks, yeah, okay, they're Elks. I knew about that. But I had never heard about Rotary, and that wasn't new. And in fact, I think today, maybe it's a little better today because of what we've gone through. But at that time, Rotary meant nothing to me, but Dick explained that what the Rotary Club did, they were doing a lot of work for the schools and doing a lot of work for the community. And he said, and actually we want you to join the Rotary Club. One problem, there are no women in Rotary. He said, but that's not going to stop us, because we'll just, you know, we'll talk to the district governor. We'll talk to the Knicks in our district. And so they talked to the district governor, and he said, I agree that women can serve, women should serve. He said, but when you register them with Rotary, just use their first initials. So when somebody said today, S. Whitlock is in the house, that's exactly how I was registered, as S. Whitlock. I mean, it could have been Stephen Whitlock, you know, Mary Lou Elliott was registered with M. Elliott, could have been Michael Elliott, could have been anything. So, but we were registered with our first initials with Rotary International. And it held up for a while. It held up until we were celebrating our 25th anniversary as a club. And you know what happens. Evanston sends all these representatives out to celebrate with you, and when they came out to the party, the women Rotarians were introduced, and they were undone. They said, we don't have women in Rotary. What is this? And somebody said, this club does. This was a little club with about 10 members, and you know, but they all were happy to have the women in the club, and only one person objected, you know, because he said he could, if they invited those women in, he can foresee the death of the club. And he was well able to foresee that, because when he left, as he did, we had a classification for undertaker open. But that's how it started. That's how we got into Rotary. And over the years, there's a long story, and someday you'll be someplace where I'm telling the story. Or you can buy the book, which is called Women Also Serve. Not Women Also Serve. Women also serve, just as everyone else does. And it seemed unreasonable, really, at the time, for Rotary to say, we don't want women. I mean, you don't want women to help do what you're doing? What's that about? So, we went through the process of getting an attorney, because Rotary sent a message back right after the representatives returned from the party. They sent a message back saying, you need to get rid of those women Rotarians. 3 things you need to do. Women are not in Rotary. You need to ask the women to leave. And if they don't leave, you need to stop calling yourself a Rotary Club. And so, one of our members, Bill Brooks, who has since passed away, said, we won't ask the women to leave, but we won't call ourselves a Rotary Club. We'll call ourselves the ex-Rotary Club. On my coat, I have a pin, a Rotary pin with a big X over it. And we named ourselves the ex-Rotary Club of Doherty. And interestingly enough, there were a lot of things that went on after that, and But interestingly enough, we were the ex-Rotary Club of Dwali for 11 years while we went through courts and battles and problems with Rotary International, because every time we'd win a case, they would appeal and we'd, and so that's how we got into Rotary. What else do I need to say?
It's important to know, so it took the U.S. Supreme Court deciding that this was a
okay, so the year that I was, when we first sued Rotary, I was just a member of Rotary, and over the years, I had gotten to the stage where I was the president-elect, and I was at, all good presidents go to Pets, and I was at Pets, and heard the district governor mention the fact that, there were women in this little renegade club, invited women to join Rotary, and Rotary didn't like that fact, and they were going to carry on with the suit, So we had sued the club. We told Rotary we were going to sue Rotary because we wanted to be accepted into the club as women, and we told them we were going to sue in federal court, and of course Rotary objected to that. They didn't want the suit in federal court. It was held in the California court, but the first California court turned us down cold. They said, Rotary has a right to put you out of the club if they don't want it, because they had taken our charter. They told us if you don't, take those women out, you're no longer a Rotary Club. They sent somebody down and picked up the charter. And so we were literally an ex-Rotary Club. So, there we were, but they said, we're not going to just sit there with that. When we lost the first case, we appealed it. Every time I tell this story, I have a son who is an attorney, and he says, Mom, that's not the way it goes. That didn't come first, this case. Well, whatever. But we lost the first case in the Superior Court in California, and our attorney, because we didn't think we'd lose it, our attorney went through looking, how he could appeal the case, what he could do, and discovered that there's an UNRU Act in California, and it's similar to that act, and is probably in all states, that prevents discrimination in public accommodation. And Rotary was considered public accommodation. At that time, probably 80% of the Rotarians had their dues paid by their clubs. It was very much good for business. It was a public accommodation. And so they appealed on that basis. We appealed on that basis. And of course, the decision was reversed. And so we went on. Rotary tried to appeal to the California Superior Court, and the California Superior Court would not hear the case. And so by the time I went to Pets, Rotary had decided that they would appeal to the United States Supreme Court. And I'm sitting in the room listening to them telling the story and thinking, hey, I'm the school principal. The Supreme Court, they take care of things like Roe versus Wade. That was a bad thought then, because where is that today? But they also took care of the discrimination cases, Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, and so on. And so, but why would they want to hear a case of a Rotary Club trying to get women in? But that's because I was not that far thinking. I wasn't thinking. They were thinking way ahead of me. And of course, the Supreme Court did take the case because it was a civil rights issue. That was the huge issue. It was a civil rights issue. And of course, in May 1987, it was some 11 years later, the Supreme Court ruled that Rotary and all other service clubs had to be no gender discrimination in those clubs.
And it's important to note that, when I went on my youth exchange, the reason that there was no women in the Brazilian clubs was because that decision only applied to the United States. It wasn't a global decision until the Council of Legislation changed things.
It had to go through the Council of Legislation before it became incumbent on all the other Rotary clubs. And of course, the first time it went to Council of Legislation, it was not passed because it wasn't put in the way it should have been. The question was, did the Rotary Club of Duarte violate Rotary's bylaws by inviting women? Well, heck yeah, we did. But what does that have to do with the price of wine? And so, now I understood much later than that how the Council of Legislation works. So the next time it went to the Council of Legislation, it went the way it should have. In fact, it had gone to the Council of Legislation way back before our time by a club from India who had requested that women be allowed to join. And of course the Council of Legislation said, you're kidding, no. And then the club in India just went away. They were just half-hearted about it anyway, so they went away. But the second time was 2 years after the Supreme Court decision. The Council of Legislation did say that it was incumbent on all Rotary clubs, and then it became a worldwide thing. Other clubs could accept women, or had to, or it was incumbent on them. And I mean, even now today, you can't charter a Rotary club unless you decide that this club is going to accept men and women, and there's no discrimination factor in anything. I mean, there was discrimination in everything. There was race discrimination. One of the first phone calls I had after the Supreme Court decision was, now that you have women in Rotary, I guess the next thing is to have in Rotary. And I said, actually, we did that with this case because we killed 2 birds with 1 stone. And I didn't have to say it because I'm a black woman, but that figured it.
and I think that that's important because, I think a lot of times when people hear the story of Sylvia Whitlock and this mythical thing, they don't talk about you being a black woman. They talk about you being the first woman. But I think being a black woman is equally as important for that story because it really did open the door for so many other people in the organization, which at the time, really, frankly, only a few years earlier were they allowing black men into certain clubs in certain areas of the world. So it really did make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's interesting because the discrimination bit is present in so many places. I mean, I dealt with it when I went to school. I dealt with it when I went to college in New York City, at public school, and I had teachers who looked at me as a little black girl from Jamaica who didn't know anything and graded me down and all of those things. So sometimes it's not as clear in the battle as it should be or as it deserves to be, but the battles get fought somehow, somewhere, and eventually things change and things go. We see it every day, but we work for it, and we understand what's going on now. I understand what's going on now. I didn't understand what was going on then, and I know how to deal with it, and so on we go.
I think as we move forward with this, I think one of the reasons that we are such good friends is because we like to stir the pot a little bit. But I think that as especially with the current situation in our country, and as we start moving forward with a lot of things, what you did with Duarte was the right thing to do. It was time for women to be in Rotary. To imagine a world where there are women in Rotary now is impossible. And as we move forward and as we open the doors for more diversity, equity, and inclusion in the organization, it really is important that we are continuing to speak up when we need to speak up and say the things that need to be said.
It is important. What's interesting is that we talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion only a couple of years ago. However, the case for women in Rotary was the first diversity, equity, and inclusion issue Rotary ever had. and it was a
It
landmark.
wasn't the first issue, it was the first one they addressed.
You know, so but it's important to keep that in mind, to know that those are the things that change the world. The world changes, and we need to change with it. Now, if you stop and think about it, Rotary is a service club, like all the other service clubs that do good for people. You know, we have all our goals, all our issues, we do good for people. And why would you say, no, I don't want women to help? You don't want them to help to do something good for people in the world? Or I don't want them to have the privilege of doing something good for people in the world, which means there was something wrong with you, and so on. So those are some of the things. When we talk about diversity and change, we talk about men, women, boys, girls, you know, young, old, black, white, you know, Asian, non-Asian, and all the rest of it. You know, I think about it because I think I said to Jennifer or somebody today, I think Asian food is the most popular food in the U.S. But we have so many things that we don't let Asians do. Nowadays, you can see Asian people on television, you can see them, you know, in different public places, and they make sure that that diversity is there. And, you know, when we talk about equity and inclusion, even when I talk to clubs, at a little club about diversity, equity, and inclusion here, we have all the right pieces. What are we doing? Are we behaving correctly? When all of you are probably familiar with a Rotary Club, where your sergeants get up at the beginning of every meeting and they pick on 4 or 5 people and fine them for things that they've done. And it's the same 4 or 5 people, the same favorites, every week that they pick on. They're not including some other people they don't even know are in the club, sitting in a corner. You know, or people change seats, you have to change the groups you're sitting with every week. And some inclusion and equity, people get a turn at doing what's hard to do every week. And I think if we do that just in our everyday life, not just in Rotary clubs, but just in our everyday life, the world will be a better place. We talk about peace and all of that. And this is a little plug for our peace conference that's coming up next February. And it's going to be based on mediation. Not meditation, mediation, mediating for peace, mediating conflict out. But, you know, how we live is what we want to focus on. And that's what we're trying to do as Rotarians, how we live and how others living, that we can make have a better life.
And it's interesting because I know that those of us who have seen President-elect Mario speak, one of his primary things is membership and how we need to do more for membership. And I think that when we opened the door to women, that did so much more for membership. When we started talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the organization, that is a membership issue. But it's also more than that. It's about the participant experience. What are we really offering everyone that the organization touches, whether that's through projects, programs, youth exchange, RILA, the different amazing programs that we have. And so I wanted you to share a little bit because you've done some amazing work around HIV, but also you do a lot of work with elevating women globally. And so I wanted you to share a little bit about that.
But probably one of the biggest ones, or the one that I'm most proud of or most involved with, is our school in Piali. This is in India. Piali is a little town outside of Calcutta in India. And when I was a district governor, my district governor nominee, my district had the habit of helping the governor nominee to support a favorite project. So they would want to know what you were interested in and what you want them to support. Well, when I was going through the nomination process, I read a book called Half the Sky. How many of you ever read that book, Half the Sky? Interesting book, because it talks about the victimization of women throughout the world, even in these United States. And, of course, huge victimization problems in India. And a very wise PDG in our district, Roger, who used to die, Roger Schulte, I talked to him about it and told him about the club, because one of the things that the author mentions in that book is the way to counter some of the victimization is by educating women. And I told him the whole story, and I said, Roger, who do you think I could work with? And he said, work with this lady called Deepa Willingham, because she was raised in India. She went to Mother Teresa's school. Her parents were physicians, so she went to school. And she's trying to start a school for girls in India. And so, to make a long story short, Deepa, our club raised $90,000. We built a school in India, a 4-story school. We have 221 girls in the school. We have already graduated 3 attorneys and 3 physicians. We have a number of them in medical school here in the US. So, you can do it. And these are girls who didn't know there was a place called school.
And really, I had the opportunity to visit with you when we were in India together, and it really is just an amazing the impact that you're having on those girls' lives, and especially through the Sylvia Whitlock Center. Is that what it's called?
Yes. Look up paceuniversal.com on your computer, and you'll see all about the school and how you can support it. Because when I speak today, any place where they offer me a stipend or something, it goes to the school. I always send it to the school because they need the support. And we have gone there because I'm a past principal. I have spent a lot of time in that school in India, training teachers, teaching them how to write lesson plans and so on. They have the first running water building there in that school. They have a flush toilet and teach the girls how to use a flush toilet. And it's just, everything is there. There's a playground there, there's a computer lab there, there's a science lab there, a 4-story building, beautiful place. They grow their own vegetables, and they're cooked right there at school. So
when I was there, I taught them how to walk a runway, which was equally as important. But I think, I am grateful for your friendship. I think that it really, truly, I did not know that I would have such a great friend in you when I first met you, and I'm super grateful for it. But I want to know, for everybody, what is your hope for the future for Rotary as we move forward in the next year, in the next 10 years?
My hope is that Rotary will have an impact, number one, on the peace, that's what we're doing, the mediation of peace, on the conflicts that are around the world, and that as they move through those, they will create the influence to make life a better experience for people everywhere, not just for the children that we encounter in the children countries. We talk about problems right here in the United States, that throughout the world, Rotary will have their influence and action in all the things that they do to make this world a better place for everyone.
Well, on behalf of myself, everyone in this room, and people around the world, thank you so much, Sylvia, for everything. And Sylvia Whitlock, everybody.